So my presentation is about the general government. So the main source that I use is the Government Finance Statistics Manual 2014 issued by the IMF. So there. So the term government is often used as a collective noun for various combinations of entities in a country involved in functions of government. So usually when we say government in our heads, we think of the state government, the local government, regional governments. Also, we think about nonprofit institutions which are under government control and some GOCCs or public corporations that are controlled by the government. So there. So one country may have several units within the umbrella of the term government. So that's how we colloquially say government in our perhaps daily dialogues with different people. So just a quick overview. This is from the GSM manual. So the government can actually be viewed as the public sector, which is comprised of general government and public corporations. In the previous workshop on general government, I think it was Cheska who presented a decision tree on how to determine whether a certain unit is part of the general government and public corporations and other institutional units. But for the purposes of this discussion, of this workshop, I'm just gonna focus on this part here, but I'm gonna make some quick mentions of some concepts related to public corporations. There, so next. So for the discussion outline, this is the main outline of my discussion. I'm gonna discuss briefly some basic concepts that's needed to understand generally what the general government is. Also, I'm gonna discuss the GFS analytic framework, and then a comparison of GFS and System of National Accounts, since System of National Accounts is the basis that we are using in constructing our SUTs, and just one example of a government financial statement which I downloaded from the government of Vanuatu. So I'm gonna show that later. Okay, so for the basic concepts, there are just three basic concepts that I'm gonna discuss. First, residence. Second, the concept of institutional unit, and the third, the concept of institutional sector. So for residence, the residence of each institutional unit is defined as the economic territory with which it has its center of predominant economic interest. So it doesn't matter the nationality of a certain unit or based on a legal criteria. What matters is the location where, sorry, the location. Hello, can you hear me?
Hello.
Okay. Okay, sorry. So what matters is the location where the unit has a predominant economic interest. So, as a converse definition, non-resident are units that are resident in any other economic territory. And for convenience, they are referred to as the rest of the world. So, in the case of the government sector or government units, the residence of the government is usually the country where where it is exercising its powers. So it's quite simple in the case of the government sector. For the next concept, institutional unit. So it is defined as an economic entity that is capable in its own right of incurring owning assets, incurring liabilities, engaging in economic activities, and in transactions with other entities. So this definition is actually very important, and we can further digest this based on its several parts. So first, an institutional unit is capable of owning assets. So the ability to own assets means that it is also able to exchange the ownership of goods or assets in transactions with other institutional units. Next, for incurring liabilities. So the ability to incur liabilities also means that an institutional unit is able to enter into contracts that will make it enter into different obligations or further future commitments with other institutions. And then the ability to engage in economic activities, this third here, means that it can make economic decisions and that it can be held responsible and accountable by law. Um, Also, another requirement to classify a certain establishment or a certain unit as an institutional unit by the definitions of the GFS and the SNA is that it should be able to have a complete set of accounts, including, for example, a balance sheet of assets, liabilities, net worth, and other books of accounts. However, it's not actually required that they have these statements, but at least they can provide one if they were required by a certain governing institution. So it is important to identify an institutional unit because it allows a sectorization of the economy. So later, I will discuss what it means to sectorize an economy. Basically, it's grouping the institutional units into the recognized sectors of the economy based on the SNA and the GFS. So there. Okay, so more definitions. Enterprise. So an enterprise is simply a view of an institutional unit as a producer of goods and services. So an enterprise may refer to a corporation, a quasi-corporation, a non-profit institution, or an unincorporated enterprise, so long as they produce goods and services. So on a more granular level, we have here an establishment, which is smaller than an institutional unit, and it is defined as an enterprise or a part of an enterprise that is situated in a single location and only engages in a single productive activity. So that's the main difference between an enterprise or an institutional unit and an establishment. An establishment can only engage in a single productive activity. There. So there's actually a hierarchical relationship between institutional units and establishments. So as I've mentioned earlier, establishments is more of at the granular level. So expectedly, an institutional unit can contain more than one establishment, as is illustrated here. So for example, this one, institutional unit A, it contains two establishments. However, an establishment can only belong to one institutional unit. So here, establishment 2, it only belongs to institutional unit A and only A. It cannot belong to both A and B. So identifying establishments is of particular interest because it helps determine the market production of general government units. So as I've mentioned earlier, since an establishment can only engage in a single productive activity, then it's easy to determine whether a certain establishment is engaging in market production or non-market production. Okay, so moreover, the classification of an institutional unit is actually determined by its objectives and functions and not necessarily from its legal status or its name. So so we're looking at the substance of the certain function of an institutional unit and not just its legal status or name. So there are two main types of institutional units. So the first type is persons or groups of persons in the form of households, and the second is legal or social entities. So for the purpose of this discussion, we're gonna focus on legal or social entities because this is the part where government units belong to. So for legal or social entity, it is defined as an entity whose existence is recognized by law or society independently of the persons or other entities that may own or control it. So it is kind of similar to an artificial person. So an artificial person is recognized separately from the persons who own that artificial entity. So there are three types of legal entities recognized as institutional units. The first type is a corporation, second is nonprofit institution, and the third is government units. So again, we're gonna focus on government units, but I'm gonna provide a brief definition of these two. So for corporations and nonprofit institutions, they are institutions which are primarily created for the purposes of production of goods and services. So for corporations, the deciding factor in classifying it as a corporation is that it is a market producer. So when it is a market producer, it means that it's producing market outputs, and a market output is defined as an output that is sold at economically significant prices, in a sense that it can affect supply and demand. So for nonprofit institutions, um, a nonprofit institution can actually engage in both market or non-market production. Or in other words, nonprofit institutions can actually operate at a profit, or it can actually mark up its products, goods and services. Hello?
Sige,
Hello?
rinig ka namin.
Okay, I'm gonna reconnect. Um, Here. Can you see my slide again?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, Jen.
so for nonprofit institutions, as I've mentioned before, I just got cut off. It can engage in both market and non-market production. So the defining or the deciding factor is that its income or profit cannot accrue to its owners. So any income that it derives from its market production, it should go back to the institution. So it doesn't generate any real profit for its owners there. And then for government units, it is mainly created by political processes. So I'm going to elaborate more on that. So government units are defined as unique kinds of legal entities established by political processes. So, for example, a certain state, the power, the government, the power of the government is granted by its constitution, and then it has a separate legislative, judicial, or executive authority over other institutional units within a given area. So here are the principal economic functions of government units. The first, I guess, is one of the most important functions. It's able to assume responsibility for the provision of goods and services to the community or individual households on a non-market basis, meaning that a government unit doesn't charge prices or economically significant prices. So if it does charge economically significant prices, then it's not considered as a government unit. It is considered as a public corporation. More on that later. And then the second function is it redistributes income and wealth by means of transfers. The third, similar to the first one, it engages in on-market production. And the fourth, it finances its activities primarily out of taxation and other compulsory transfers. Okay. Okay, so just an exercise. So in identifying government units. So suppose in country A, there exists a regional office of the Education Bureau that is in charge of monitoring the implementation of the Bureau's curriculum in local public schools. So it's like a branch of the Education Bureau in a certain regional or provincial place. The regional office has the power to allocate teaching modules and school materials across all public schools in the region. All modules are forwarded by the Central Education Bureau to regional offices, and also the amount of school materials for procurement, along with the cash to be dispersed, requires approval from the Central Bureau. So the question is whether or not the Regional Education Bureau of Country A is an institutional unit or particularly a government unit? So the answer is it's not a government unit. So while it has the power to allocate resources across schools within its jurisdiction, it lacks the essential characteristics to be identified as an institutional unit, which I've emphasized earlier. That is, it doesn't have the authority to own its own assets. It doesn't have the ability to incur liabilities in its own right and engage in transaction in its own rights in its own right, because it always needs prior approval to the from the Central Education Bureau. So it's more of like an administrative function that they're doing there. So more definitions. So in general, all entities funded by appropriations made in accordance with the budget controlled by the legislator are not separate institutional units and are considered as constituting a single institutional unit. So if a certain unit receives appropriations along with other government units, then they do not constitute a separate or an independent government unit. So they must be consolidated to that central government unit that where control or power is emanating. And then for the government, it usually comprises of two or more institutional units, and there normally is one unit that controls the other units. So the controlling unit most likely includes the legislature, the head of state, and the judiciary. So one government unit controls another by appointing its managers. So like with our earlier example with the Regional Education Bureau, or determining the laws and regulations that provides its finance rather than through equity ownership. Again, more definitions. So there are these units called extra budgetary units. So these are government entities with a separate legal identity and substantial autonomy. So it has a discretion over the volume and composition of your expenditures. It has a direct source of revenue, and also it has earmarked taxes. So these entities are able to carry out functions such as road construction, non-market production such as health and education services. So I guess in the context of the Philippines, several local government units have a certain level of autonomy. So in a way, they can be considered as extra budgetary units. Yeah. So public corporations. I've mentioned this several times already. So in contrast to general government units, public corporations are institutional units, but they are sources of potential financial gains and losses because they engage in market production. So again, if a certain unit engages in market production, even if they are wholly controlled by government, then they cannot be considered within the definition of a government unit, but rather they are within the definition of corporations. There. So the next concept is the institutional sector. So the institutional sector groups together similar kinds of institutional units according to their economic objectives, functions, and behavior. So each sector consists of a number of institutional units that are present in the economy and is intrinsically different from the other sectors. So as opposed to institutional units, which may vary from country to country or jurisdiction to jurisdiction. For institutional sectors, we actually have a fixed number. So an economy is divided into 5 mutually exclusive institutional sectors. So all resident institutional units are allocated to one of these institutional sectors. So we have 5: the non-financial corporation sector, the financial corporation sector, general government sector, household sector, and nonprofit institutions serving household sector. So for this report, we're gonna focus on the general government sector. Okay, so here. So this table just shows the relationship between institutional sector and institutional unit. So if a certain establishment is classified as a household unit, then it can only form part of the household sector. If a certain establishment is classified as a corporation, then it can either be a non-financial corporation or a financial corporation. If it's an NPI unit, so it can either be a non-financial corporation, a financial corporation, depending on its activities, and it can be also part of the general government sector if it is controlled by government. And it can also, finally, it can be part of the non-profit institution serving households if it engages in non-market production, but it isn't controlled by the government. And then for government units, it can only form part of the general government sector. Hello?
Hi, John.
Okay. Okay. Sabi kasi bad network quality. Okay. Okay, so let's focus on the general government sector. So the general government sector consists of resident institutional units that fulfill the functions of government as its primary activity. So it comprises of the central, state, provincial, regional, local government, social security funds, and also all non-market and PIs controlled by government units. So again, it does not include public corporations, even if it's wholly owned and controlled by government units. Okay, so let's move forward to the GFS, or the Government Financial Statistic Analytic Framework. So there are actually various ways to organize government transactions. So it can serve an accountability purpose where activities are organized according to government unit. It can also be presented for managerial and planning purposes, such that it is organized by kind of item purchased, sold, or services provided or acquired. It can also be presented in a billing or control kind of way. However, this framework, the GFS analytic framework, does not serve these functions, but rather it is designed to facilitate fiscal analysis in a broader macroeconomic concept. So, okay, so traditionally, governments have employed cash basis in presenting government financial statistics. So this was reflected in the past manual, the 1986 manual, but this was the time when governments highly relied on cash. So that's the reason why cash basis was accepted before. So, however, in modern times, government have become less liquidity constrained in carrying out fiscal policy and have become more adept at separating the time of fiscal action from the time that it is paid for. So that's why the GFS analytic framework moved from a cash way of presentation to an accrual system of recording. So beginning GFSM 2001, the GFS analytic framework is presented in the form of interrelated accrual-based statements. So more on this, an accrual-based system provides a more comprehensive assessment of the economic impact of government activity and the resulting changes of liquidity, because there are actually several statements or reports which can be generated using the accrual-based statements, so which we're gonna discuss more on later. Okay, so the use of accrual-based statements is also in line with the intertemporal budget constraint, since countries aren't actually constrained by its by the liquidity capacity or its cash balance for a certain year. It's actually looking forward into the next T years, next N years, in making its financial decisions. So, as I've mentioned earlier, this analytic framework still encompasses the traditional cash-based fiscal reporting to support liquidity analysis. So, okay, so the coverage of GFS encompasses all institutional units that materially affect fiscal policies. So for the general government sector, it captures those units primarily involved in non-market activities, while for the public corporation sector, it captures activities of the public corporations or those corporations that engages in market production. So once an institutional unit has been classified to a sector, all its flows and stock positions are recorded in that sector. So for the government sector, the four financial statements, which is comprised in the GFS analytic framework, are these. So statement of operations and statement of other economic flow. So it's like an income statement, the balance sheet, which shows the statement of financial position of a certain country at a certain period of time, and statement of sources and uses of cash. So this fourth statement is like the cash basis statement there. So the first three statements can actually be combined to show that all changes in stock positions result from flows. So in a way, it can also be used as a checking, such that any movement in the balance sheet should always be explained by the operations and other economic flows. Okay, so first for the statement of operations, so it presents the details of transactions in revenue and expense of the government, as well as the net investment and non-financial assets, the net acquisition of financial assets, and the net incurrence of liabilities. So for the statement of operations, it would generally look like this. So here we have the revenue, which is comprised of taxes, social contributions, grants, and other sources of revenue. So our revenue is defined as any transaction that increases net worth. So next, expense. It is comprised of compensation of employees, use of goods and services, consumption of fixed capital, interest, subsidies, grants to other institutions, social benefits, and other expenses. So generally, an expense transaction is defined as any transaction that decreases net worth. And then for net investment of non-financial assets, so it's equal to the acquisition minus disposals minus consumption of fixed capital, since consumption of fixed capital is located in here in the expense portion, plus changes in inventories in these assets. So in fixed assets, in inventories, in valuables, and in non-produced assets. So that's the net investment in non-financial assets. Next, so we have here two very crucial statistics. First is the net operating balance, which is just equal to the difference between revenue and expense. So it reflects the total change in net worth due to transactions made by the government during the specific period examined. And then for net lending or borrowing, so if this portion here is positive, so it means that it is net lending since it has a surplus of funds which can be lent to other institutions. While if the amount here is negative, in here is negative, then it's net borrowing. Okay, so net lending or borrowing is equal to net operating balance minus the net or gross investment in non-financial assets. So it should also equal the difference between financial assets and liabilities. Okay, so the statement of operations is actually a very important report because it shows the change in net worth or the net operating balance. And it can be largely attributed directly to government policies since governments have direct control over the decisions that lead to the interaction with other units. So those interaction are causes the transactions that results in revenue or the incurrence of expenses. Moreover, net lending and borrowing can also be viewed as an indicator of the financial impact of government activity on the rest of the economy and the rest of the world. So, if it has a surplus, then it has money to lend to others, while if it has a deficit, then it has to borrow money to finance its activities. Okay, so for statements of sources and uses of cash. So, as I've mentioned, it reflects the transactions that when using the cash basis of recording. So information in this report is useful in assessing the liquidity of the general government and public sectors. So higher levels of cash means that the government is more liquid and that it can be able to um, address its short-term obligations. So, hello.
Jan?
Okay, nawala ulit. I'm sharing my screen again. Here. Hello, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so this is how the statement of sources and uses of cash flows look like. So it kind of looks like the statement of operations, except that it only includes the transactions in cash. So revenue cash flow, so taxes collected already, social contributions collected, grants received, and other receipts. The same goes for expenses, so compensation paid, actually paid, purchases paid, interest, subsidies, grants, and others. So the difference between revenue cash flows and expense cash flows represents the net cash inflow from operating activities, since these are operating activities. And then next is the cash flows from transactions in non-financial assets. So it's actually just parallel to the statement of operations, except that it's in cash. So here we outflow from investment. Um, yeah, there. So okay, so another statement is the statement of other economic flows. So it actually shows the changes in assets, liabilities, and net worth that is not a result of transactions showed in the statement of operations. So these changes are classified as either changes in value or volume of assets and liabilities. So for example, change in net worth due to holding gains or as a result of changes in prices, and change in net worth due to other changes in the volume of assets. So, for example, if a certain government building sets on fire and it's destroyed, so there is a change in not due to cause. So, events are okay. So the other so government looks like this. So this from here, and then other changes in volumes and liabilities in here. And then for the balance sheet, it is a statement of the values of the stock positions of assets owned and the liabilities owned by an institutional unit drawn up in respect of a particular point in time. So it is like a snapshot of the balances or the stock, while the statement of operations and statement of other economic flows represent the flows or the change in net worth during the period. So the balance sheet essentially looks like this. So this net worth um, is just the difference between assets and liabilities. But also the figure that we got from our statement of operations and statement of other economic flows should balance with the figure in here, since changes in balances are reflected in those statements. Furthermore, changes in net worth is also a fiscal indicator for assessing the sustainability of fiscal activities. So if net worth is increasing, then it may be a signal that fiscal activities undertaken is sustainable. While if it is shrinking, then the government may have to assess its activities during the period. Okay, so there are actually several uses of the government financial statistics for fiscal analysis. So these are just some examples. So for the net lending or borrowing, so it can be viewed from two perspectives. So as I mentioned earlier, it is the figure that is just equal to the revenue minus expense minus transactions on non-monetary assets. So this perspective shows the structure of revenue sources and the composition of expenditure during the period. So it's also called the above the line, while another perspective on net lending and borrowing is called the below the line, or the difference between financial assets and financial liabilities. So viewing it this way shows how the government invests its surpluses and how it finances its deficits. Another indicator which we can get from our GFS is the fiscal burden, or the indicator of the compulsory contributions to the government. So it is measured by just getting the sum of taxes and social contributions from the statement of operations. Okay, there. So next, let's compare the GFS and the SNA, since this is the SNA is the one that we are using for our work. So the GFS Manual 2014 is actually harmonized with the SNA 2008. So this means that, broadly speaking, the principles and concepts defined in the GFS is actually defined also the same way in SNA. So particularly, so there is the same delineation between resident and non-resident entities, same sectorization, same definitions and classifications of financial instruments, same accounting rules. So both are based on the accrual basis here. But there's still particular differences between the GFS and the SNE. So first is in the analytical framework. So as I discussed, the GFS has 4 statements, including a cash flow statement, while in the SNA, it is presented using a sequence of 7 accounts. So we have the production account. This is on the perspective of the government sector. So we have the production account, generation of income account, allocation of primary income account. And so the second difference is in the aspect of focus. So as mentioned earlier, the GFS focuses on measuring the impact of economic events on the finances of the government. So we can see from the GFS the government's activities through taxing, spending, borrowing, and lending. While the SNA, it focuses on linkages between sectors of the economy. So next is the difference based on consolidation. So for the GFS, it eliminates all intra and intersector flows and stock positions between units of the same sector and subsectors. But in the SNA, consolidation is not used as a matter of principle. So I've looked for an example of this, and I've read that there are two types of transactions that appear to take place between two government units, which are never consolidated in the SNA. So one of the example is that the case of employer social contributions paid to the Social Security or the government pension. So for the GFS, for the SNA, it is treated as being paid to the employee as part of compensation to employee and then paid by the employee to the fund. While for the GFS, since it is uh, paid by the employer, which is a government institution, then it's eliminated by means of consolidation. So that's one example. And then another difference is in terms of FISM, insurance services, and fees related to standardized guarantees. So for GFS, FISM is not separately identified because estimating FISM can only be done by considering data for all sectors in the economy, such as in the national accounts. So this is not available for GFS purposes, but in the SNA, the values of FISM, insurance services, and guarantees are derived by partitioning the amount of interest, non-life insurance premiums, and standardized guarantees. So next is in terms of transfers in kind. So for GFS purposes, so goods and services produced by government and transferred in kind are recorded as imputed sales only when they are provided to employees as wages in kind. But if they are provided, say, to other government units, then they are not considered as imputed sales, and only the cost of producing these goods and services is recognized as an expense item in the statement of operations. While in the SNA, all transactions or transfers in kind are considered as an imputed sale. And then another difference is the internal transactions with respect to own account capital formation. So for GFS purposes, compensation of employees, use of goods and services, consumption of fixed capital incurred in own account capital formation are excluded from expenses. So these items are directly recognized or capitalized as part of the cost of the acquisition of non-financial asset. However, in SNA, we recognize compensation of employees, use of goods and services, and consumption of fixed capital as a separate expense in the production account. So that's one vital difference between GFS and SNA. So there are actually more particular differences. The GFS manual actually discuss the granular differences in terms of the different accounts of the SNA. But for this report, I'm only gonna look at the differences in terms of the SNA production account. So for the general government, the production accounts represents the general government's contribution to the domestic production. In the SNA, however, total output is divided into market output, output for own final use, and other non-market output. So this kind of division is not recorded as such in the GFS. So for SNA purposes, to get the market output, we get the GFS revenue, net revenue item called the sales by market establishments. We add the changes in inventories of work in progress, and we add the changes in inventories of finished goods. So this is kind of similar to what Cheska discussed 2 weeks ago, in harmonizing or connecting business accounts to SNA. So to establish a direct link with the SNA, GFS data on changes in inventories need to be divided between market and non-market establishments. So in here, in the changes in inventories in here, we only include those for non-market, for market, since we are getting market output. And then in the non-market output, for SNA purposes, it cannot be determined from GFS sales because if you recall, any non-market production or provision is not recognized as an imputed sale in the GFS, but rather it is just included as an expense item in the GFS. So therefore, to get the SNA non-market output, we just get the sum of compensation of employees, use of goods and services, consumption of fixed capital, other taxes on production paid, and deducting other subsidies on production received. So since we're only computing for non-market output, it is necessary to divide these expenses between those incurred by market establishments and those incurred by non-market establishments. Okay. So essentially, what we're including in the market output are the output of the public corporations, since they're the ones that engage in market production. And then another output is the output for own final use. So it is the value of goods and services produced for own final use or non-financial assets constructed for own use by general government units. So this is directly available as a memorandum item in the balance sheet of the GFS report. So we can just get the information from the memorandum item. So in the SNA, provision is made to value this output at market prices if assets constructed on own account are also offered for sale on the market. If it's not, then it will be valued on a cost basis. And then for intermediate consumption, so intermediate consumption includes the following GFS items. So use of goods and services, you can get that from expense item 22 after deducting the portion of goods purchased for resale that was actually sold during the reporting period. So next is getting the goods and services used in own account capital formation. Since in the GFS, this is capitalized as part of the cost of the asset being built, while for SNA purposes, this should be classified as an expense item. And then we also get the consumption of financial intermediation service or FISIN, and also the consumption of insurance services and standardized guarantees. So there. So I took one example. Look at financial statement of the Megapan. It's actually available in the Ministry of Finance page of Vanuatu. And then what I was aiming for is to compute for the different elements of the production account. However, when I delve into the statement, I read that their statements are compiled with International Public Sector Accounting Standards, or the IPSAS. I've looked at several other financial statements also, and apparently not a lot of countries are applying the GFS. So cash basis. So depending on the reporting presentation of countries, it becomes a challenge to bridge government reports to SNE data. So that's one thing that we must be wary for in using government financial statements. However, one good thing is that the financial statements of the government of Vanuatu is based on accrual systems. There. So I have here just the 2013 financial statements since that's the latest one available in their website. So I researched on the important conceptual differences in IPSAS and GFS. Currently, there are efforts to harmonize these two, but these are the prevailing differences. So in the objectives, as I've mentioned, GFS, it aims to evaluate economic impact, while IPSAS, it aims to evaluate financial performance and financial position for accountability purposes. So it's more of like for an auditing objective. And then the reporting entity, so for GFS, reporting entity are institutional units and sectors, and for IPSAS, it's based on economic entity and consolidation. The recognition criteria for GFS is accrual basis of recording when economic value is created, transformed, exchanged, transferred, and extinguished, which is the same as SNA, while for IPSAS, past events with probable outflows are recognized, or in other words, provisions are recognized in the IPSAS. So in examining expenses presented by an presented in a financial statement prepared in accordance to IPSAS, provisions should not be included. So examples of these are provisions for bad debts and other provisions. So for valuation in the GFS, it is valued in accordance to current market prices. Well, for IPSAS, there are actually several acceptable valuation. So for some assets, the valuation should be at fair value. For some, it's at historic cost and other bases. So these are indicated in the notes of the financial statements of the government prepared using IPSAS. Then for revaluations and other value changes, for GFS, all revaluations and changes in volume are included in the statement of other economic flows, while for IPSAS, it is included in its statement of financial performance or the income statement as realized and unrealized gains and losses. So in the SNA, these are what we call the holding gains and losses. So this is the statement of financial performance, which is kind of parallel to a combination of the statement of operations and statement of other economic flows of the GFS. So here we have the revenue, the expenses, and the net operating balance, which just follows the same formula as the one in the GFS. So it's just revenue less expenses. And then here's the statement of financial position, which is parallel to the balance sheet in the GFS. So we have assets, liabilities, and net worth. And then statement of cash flows. It is parallel to the statement of uses of cash in the GFS. So it is also parallel to the income statement, but just the cash basis. So we have here taxation revenue, collected as cash, licenses, donor contributions, and so on. And for the expenses, the cash disbursements for personal payments, operating payments, interest expense, and so on. So there. So that actually is my report for general government. If you have some questions, please let me know.